is officially a new era for BYU football as the Cougars are making the transition from an independent to the Big 12. But after a disappointing 2022 season, how will BYU fare in a Power 5 conference? How will they fare now facing 10 Power 5 teams instead of just the 5 that they faced last year? There are a lot of questions surrounding this program in their first year in the Big 12, and we're here to answer them all today at the Gridiron Expert. So welcome back to the channel, guys. We're so glad that you could join us today as we're ready to break down, analyze, and predict everything you need to know for BYU's upcoming college football season. As always, please continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos. Check out everything down in the description below, including our expert picks over on our website, thegridironexpert.com. One of the best college football and NFL spread picks in the entire country over there. You do not want to miss out on that, beating out over 80% of the national analysts and handicappers each of the last 5 years. Also, check out our Patreon account as well. If you love these predictions, you're going to love the exclusive content we have over on Patreon. Join our Patreon Wall of Fame and take advantage of those exclusive content and that exclusive offer over there. And take advantage of sending us some gear as well. Check out the address down in the description. Send us some stuff regarding your team as we continue to expand our GE Nation from coast to coast. So let's talk some BYU football. How about that? I got to say, I really do like this team, and I'm honored and excited that BYU is the first newcomer in the Big 12 that we're predicting this prediction season. So they get the honor of being the first new team in the Big 12 that we predict. Last year was supposed to be a pretty big year for BYU, all things considered, but the Cougars went 8-5. Had a lot of starters back, had a strong start, including that big win over Baylor in week 2, rose up to number 12 in the rankings, actually started 4-1 with the lone loss coming to Oregon, and then lost 4 straight games before winning their final 4, including a bowl win over SMU. You look at the team and the personnel, right? 8 starters back on the offensive side of the ball, landing Keaton Slovis in at quarterback, transferring in from Pittsburgh. Used to play at USC, then Pittsburgh, now at BYU. Very solid guy if he can stay healthy. That's going to be the biggest concern for the Cougars is quarterback health. They do land a very solid transfer running back as well, though. Aiden Robbins transferring in from UNLV, where he rushed for over 1,000 yards. This is a pretty solid team. Also in the pass catching core, 4 of their top 6 pass catchers coming back, including their star tight end Isaac Rex. So this is a team that averaged over 30 points per game last year and can see them doing it again this year. It's the defense that needs the most work. Last year BYU, 10 starters back on defense. Everybody thought they were going to be pretty salty. They were not. They gave up 29.5 points per game, gave up over 174 rushing yards per game. And Klein Sataka realized they needed to change, so he went out and hired Weber State out of the FCS, their head coach Jay Hill, to become the new defensive coordinator in Provo. Weber State only allowed 325 yards per game last year, allowed 283 yards per game in 2021, and BYU now returns 5 of their top 6 tacklers from last season. This defense could take a massive step forward. You take a look at the Cougars, guys, and what they're dealing with schedule-wise. It's not terrible. A lot of Power 5 opponents, obviously, but schedule could have been much worse. I do think they start 2-0 with a win over Sam Houston, who is now a FBS school playing in the Conference USA, and a win over Southern Utah as well. So 2-0 start before they go to Arkansas in week 3. I'm going to go ahead and mark this up as a loss. I think many would agree with that assessment. Arkansas torched BYU last year in Provo, beating the Cougars 52-35. BYU, that defense, gave up 644 yards of offense, including 277 on the ground. All those guys for Arkansas that put up those type of numbers are pretty much back. KJ Jefferson's back at quarterback. Rocket Sanders is back at running back. The offensive line is solid. Arkansas landed a lot of top wide receivers in the transfer portal. They've got home field advantage now. To me, I just don't see BYU having enough changing this early on to beat Arkansas in Fayetteville. So BYU takes their first loss to the Razorbacks, and then they kick off Big 12 play, their first Big 12 game at Kansas on September 23rd. And this is kind of a benefit, honestly, for BYU. Arkansas and Kansas, to me, have a relatively similar offense, and that's fitting considering Arkansas and Kansas played each other in the Liberty Bowl last year. But Kansas is a very high-octane offense. They're very balanced. They can air it out. They can run the ball extremely well. It's going to be a true test for BYU's defense. If Arkansas torches them again, what adjustments does Jay Hill make defensively to try to go in and beat Kansas? That's going to be the million-dollar question here. But ultimately, guys, I don't think BYU does beat Kansas. I don't think they will. I'm not saying that Lawrence has the biggest home field advantage in the world, but still is not an advantage as compared to playing in Provo. Kansas returns 10 starters offensively, one that averaged over 184 rushing yards per game. Jalen Daniels is back at quarterback. Hopefully he stays healthy. Devin Neal back at running back. This offense is loaded. And while the defense is bad, and BYU certainly can put up some points, I do believe that Kansas does take care of business at home, just like they did very well early on last year. So BYU goes from 2-0 to 2-2, 0-1 in their first Big 12 game, but they get their first conference win ever, in the Big 12 at least, over Cincinnati Friday night in Provo. Talk about a great way to welcome and usher in Big 12 play to your home crowd, your home stadium. Bringing in another fellow newcomer in Cincinnati on a Friday night under the lights. Fantastic atmosphere. And I think this game could get ugly. Cincinnati is not going to do much this year. Their offense is looking really, really bad. This could be a game where Jay Hill and this defense for BYU flex their muscle a little bit and take care of business. Again, I just don't have much faith in Emory Jones running that Cincinnati offense. While the defense might be solid, they're not going to have an answer for that Provo crowd. People underestimate how powerful Utah is, how powerful Provo is. That home field advantage is extremely underrated. Cincinnati falls. BYU gets their first conference win in the Big 12. They're 3-2 heading into their early bye week after 5 games. And that's where they hit a huge stretch, right? You got to play 7 straight games to close out the year. Coming out of the bye week, they go on the road to TCU, the national runner-up, following in the national championship to Georgia last year. You know, everybody wants to talk about how bad TCU might be, how big of a drop-off they're going to have after losing so many star players, especially offensively. And while I don't think many of us expect them to repeat a 13-win season, TCU is still going to be very, very competitive. They still have a talented quarterback in Chandler Morris. The defense of their own wasn't great last year, but with 7 starters back, should improve drastically. And being on the road for BYU, I just don't see them taking down the Horned Frogs, who I think are going to surprise some people again, because I think the expectations have been lowered significantly, maybe more so than they need to be. So BYU falls to TCU, but gets a huge quality win at home against Texas Tech. Again, here's the thing. A lot of these Big 12 schools, we talk about the newcomers coming in and maybe the disadvantages that they might have. You think about some of these Big 12 schools now having to go to different environments. A lot of these players have played in all the Texas schools. They played at West Virginia. They played, in Kansas. They haven't been to Provo. They haven't been to Orlando. They haven't been to Cincinnati. There's a lot of, new experiences with the other teams, and these guys are going to have a bit of a culture shock when they have to go further west than they've ever been, at least in conference play. Texas Tech's a salty team. They're going to be great. First meeting between BYU and the Red Raiders since 1940, but home field advantage plays a huge role in this game for me. I think the BYU secondary steps up in a big way to shut down a Texas Tech offense that's going to be electric, one of the best in the conference, no doubt about it. Texas Tech's coming off back-to-back games against Baylor and Kansas State, and this is a Texas Tech team that defensively allowed 426 yards per game last year. They weren't any good either. It's going to take a lot of time for them to kind of find some success defensively. Offensively, not an issue. Defensively, yes. Give me the win for BYU at home over Texas Tech, kind of still keeping themselves in that bowl contention heading into that back half of the year. And they're going to need that, because if you look at some of those road games down the stretch, at Texas, at West Virginia, at Oklahoma State, and then even the home game against Oklahoma, it's a rough stretch where BYU is going to have to win at least 2 of those. And I can tell you right now, I think they drop those next 2 road games. I'll tell you that right now. I think they fall to Texas, and I think they fall to West Virginia. Texas, to me, is a no-brainer. I know BYU owns the series edge. That's kind of a shock to some people. They own that series edge over the Longhorns. They even beat Texas 41-7 on the road back in 2014. But this Texas team is going to be really, really good in 2023. Practically everybody back offensively. The defense is extremely underrated again. They didn't get enough credit last year. Don't see BYU winning that game in Austin. And then having back-to-back road games and you being the farthest west team does not benefit them. I actually wouldn't be surprised if BYU tried to maybe linger around in the South after that Texas game, because to go back to Provo and then go all the way to Morgantown, West Virginia, that's a lot of traveling for this Cougar squad. And coming off a physical, possibly beating to Texas, West Virginia is not the best team in the world by any means, but I am concerned about that road trip. I am concerned about BYU's rushing defense that gave up 174 rushing yards per game, now facing a West Virginia team that wants to run the football and average 172 rushing yards per game last year. So all those things combined, just don't see BYU winning either of those road games. And so now they're kind of behind the mark, right? They're a little bit behind the mark, 4-5 through 9 games. They still have to win 2 of their final 3, but lucky for them, 2 of those final 3 are at home. They get one of those 2 wins against Iowa State. Give me the win over the Cyclones. I think this actually has an opportunity to be a relatively low-scoring battle. Iowa State certainly has a lot of talent coming back, more experienced than they were last year. Defense is going to be phenomenal. So if that defense comes in and shuts down Keaton Slovis and this BYU offense, again, this revamped BYU defense is going to have to find a way to slow down Iowa State offense that wasn't all that great last year to begin with. So it's going to be an interesting game here. Home field advantage to me, though, plays a bigger role than people realize, especially for this game against the Cyclones. So I like BYU, the sense of urgency there to beat an Iowa State team. It's going to be middle of the pack, Big 12. They got 5 wins. They need 1 more to go bowling in their first year, and that would be a heck of an accomplishment for Kalani Sitake and his squad. Do they get a win in one of those final 2 games? Yes. Yes, they do. And they get it at home on senior night in the cold against Oklahoma, who very well could be a top 10 team fighting for a college football playoff spot. Yes, call us crazy, but that's exactly what we're picking. This is a huge, huge, huge trap game for the Sooners. No doubt about it. And you know that BYU would love nothing more than their first year in the conference to play spoiler for one of the conference elites, for one of the conference heavy favorites. And you look at Oklahoma here. This is a road trip out west they're not accustomed to, especially this late in the year. This Provo crowd is going to be rocking. An opportunity to, even if BYU was terrible, an opportunity to knock off one of the best teams maybe in the country, certainly within the conference. Chance to play spoiler. I think Oklahoma maybe overlooks BYU just a little bit. I think they kind of overlook this Cougars team. That they can go in there and exploit this defense. And I think instead, this BYU defense turns in one heck of a performance. The Sooners will be one of the better offenses that they face all year, but we have them beating Texas Tech, who is right on par with the Sooners. We have them taking down Cincinnati, who's not going to have as great of an offense, but certainly is going to have a pretty solid defense. We're going to see a battle-tested BYU team up until this point, and I think Kalani Sitake pulls a rabbit out of his hat, beats Oklahoma, shakes up the college football world. Doing so clinches bowl eligibility. Anything extra would just be a bonus, the cherry on top. I do think, though, BYU drops their final game at Oklahoma State. I don't think they are able to win that game on Oklahoma State Senior Day in Stillwater. I think they're still riding that high over Oklahoma. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, we win, we got 7 wins, that's awesome, but we got our goal, and that goal is to go bowling in year 1 in a Power 5 conference, our first year in the league. And I do think BYU is good enough to do that. The transfers that Kalani Sitake brought in are good enough to do that. Keaton Slovis is good enough to do that. And I do have a lot of faith in Jay Hill as that new defensive coordinator. I think BYU could surprise people on that side of the ball after having a major letdown in 2022. So after it's all said and done, guys, the Cougars, 6-6, they're going bowling. And they, at the end of the day, might be the best newcomer in the Big 12. We have yet to see UCF, Cincinnati, or Houston. We'll predict them soon. But right now, BYU, 6-6, going bowling, and that is one heck of an accomplishment, all things considered. So guys, as always, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos. Of course, check out everything down in the description below. Check out our expert picks over on thegridironexpert.com. Check out our Patreon account. Check out our address to make sure to send us some gear to represent your team, represent yourself, and our GE Nation. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.